Hello and welcome back to the Paul Witwer Football Show. Once again, I'm the host of this podcast, and every week I will be covering all things NFL and college football. As I launch this podcast, I'm figuring out a couple of things about how I want the podcast formatted and how long I want each episode to be. It looks like, as of right now, the first two episodes will be released around the same time and will each be around 1 to 2 hours. This will not, however, be the format and length moving forward. However, like I said, these first two episodes are covering a lot of information and kind of need to be this long. In the future, I want to shave the time down to 30 minutes, and I'll have more defined segments for each show. With all of that being said, let's get straight into the AFC preview, and we'll start with the AFC North. Like the last episode, we're going to go north, east, south, ending with the AFC West, and I will start each division with the team who I think will finish last, and then we will go to the team who I think will finish first. So 4, 3, 2, 1 will be the order. So for the AFC North, I'm going to start with the Cleveland Browns. Some positives for the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, their defense is really good. Myles Garrett, I think, is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. I think he's finished in the top 3 for that award for the past 3 seasons. And I think this year he has an even better chance to break through. I like Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome, their boundary corners, a lot. I think Denzel Ward right now I would consider an elite corner, and Newsome has the ability to be that as well. I like the addition, obviously, of Owusu-Koramoah from last year's draft. I think he is what this team was missing in terms of speed at the linebacker position. And I like bringing in the safety John Johnson III. He will really help Grant Delpit in his second year. Another positive I have for this team is the running backs. Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb are one of the best running back duos in the NFL. They're going to, without Deshaun Watson, obviously, they're going to rely on those two players to kind of carry this offense until Deshaun Watson comes back. I believe after 11 games, once he comes back, they'll try to throw the ball more. Another positive I have for this team is the offensive line. I think they have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. They definitely have one of the best guards in Wyatt Teller, one of the better tackle groups in Jack Conklin and Jedrick Wills Jr., and then Joel Bitonio, who's been there for a long time. He's great as well. Some negatives. Obviously, I have this team in last place in this division, but I do like the talent on this team. The problem is obviously the controversy with Deshaun Watson. I think that's going to be a cloud over this organization and will really prevent them from competing for the division title this year. However, moving forward, I think that will change. Another negative, obviously, is Jacoby Brissett. As of right now, he's their starting quarterback. He's probably one of the bottom tier starting quarterbacks in the NFL at this point. I think they want him to keep them afloat in the division. Unfortunately, I just think there's too much talent at the top of this division for Jacoby Brissett to be able to keep them afloat and keep them in striking position for either winning the division or second in the division. Another negative I have, I'm not a huge fan of the receiver group. I like Amari Cooper, but at this stage in his career, he's quite a bit older now. I believe he just turned 30. Sorry, he's actually 28, 29 years old. So he's getting close to 30. And he's just never been able to really put a team over the top. He was great that first year with the Cowboys, and the first couple of years he was drafted by the Raiders. But since then, he kind of needs an elite quarterback to really motivate him to play better. And Donovan Peoples-Jones, we'll see how he steps into that wide receiver 2 role. I'm not super confident as of right now. He was kind of only used as a deep down the field guy last year with Baker, and then they have their draft pick, David Bell, out of Purdue, who didn't really grade out well at the combine, lacks a lot of those physical traits that you look for in wide receivers. So ultimately, I have them going 6-11 this year. I think the game at Carolina to start the season they're on upset alert there. I think Carolina could definitely pull out a win there. And then I think they kind of have a pretty easy schedule. They play the Jets, they play Atlanta. I think they can steal one against Pittsburgh, play Washington, Houston, and I think they can maybe get one against Baltimore or Cincinnati. So I've got them going 6-11, and next year I think they'll have a better opportunity to really compete in the division. Next, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers in this division. Some positives. Obviously, when Mike Tomlin is your head coach, this would be the first time Mike Tomlin in his career would finish under 500. And I think that this team is a little bit better than the team last year. That's not saying anything bad about Mike Tomlin, obviously, but I think the division is a little bit better this year than it was last year, especially with the Baltimore Ravens now, I think, being healthier. That will really the Steelers will really struggle even in their own division. So Mike Tomlin is definitely still a positive. He'll keep the culture great, and the team will still be very good. I just don't see them really competing for the division at this point. Also, the skill position groups, obviously with Najee Harris being your running back, he's going to get a ton of work. And Mitchell Trubisky being your quarterback, or Kenny Pickett in the future being your quarterback, Najee Harris is going to get a majority of the workload in the offense. I really like their wide receivers. George Pickens that they just got out of Georgia. He's one of my draft crushes. I think he's super athletic. Definitely could have been a first-round pick if he didn't injure his ACL in college. I also like Deontay Johnson as their number 1. I think he's been very good ever since he came out of Toledo. And I think he's a little small for a number 1 wide receiver. In my opinion, 5'10" is a little small, but I really do think he is very good as a boundary receiver and he's very fast. And then Pickens, I think, has pushed Claypool to the slot, which I didn't think many people expected early. So, having Claypool as your third option as just a really big slot definitely helps you as an offense. And then I like Pat Freiermuth, who they got this year in the draft as well. I think last year in the draft. My bad. He was draft picked out of Penn State last year. I think he was good as a rookie, and I think he'll continue to improve this year. Another positive I have is obviously the defense. When you have a defense that is coached by Mike Tomlin, it's going to be better than what their talent is, but they have a really talented defense on top of that. So I think that they definitely have an opportunity to be a top 5 defense, maybe even potentially a top 3 defense. Minkah Fitzpatrick, I think, is one of the better safeties in the NFL. And I'm not sure what the Dolphins were thinking when they traded him. Really, probably one of the dumber moves a franchise has ever made, at least in recent memory, when it comes to giving up on a player way too easily. I like their quarterback group. I think Cameron Sutton is a decent corner. And obviously their pass rushers with TJ Watt, Alonzo Highsmith. They got Cam Hayward and Larry Ogunjobi at their on their D line because they run a 3-4. The only kind of player who's been a little bit more disappointing than I expected coming out of the draft was Devin Bush. I really thought Devin Bush was kind of those once in a while or once in a generation type linebackers. He just has not really panned out at middle linebacker for them. Some negatives. Their offensive line is pretty atrocious. Honestly, I'm not even very familiar with this group at all. I think they're starting Dan Moore Jr., who was drafted in the 4th round out of A&M last year. He wasn't great for them last year. Hopefully these guys, he can improve. I think both tackle positions are not great. Their interior is not great. They're really going to struggle protecting Mitchell Trubisky. I think that's why they've stuck with Mitchell Trubisky, is because he's a more mobile quarterback, and behind a bad offensive line, I think you need someone a little bit more mobile than Kenny Pickett, and someone who can kind of create a little bit more offense. Another negative is, we touched on it already, Mitchell Trubisky. Right now they've got Mason Rudolph as their backup, and then Kenny Pickett is the third. I'm not really sure why they've decided to keep Mason Rudolph instead of trading him when he had such a good preseason, but again, that's obviously their team. They can do whatever they want. They may have just not liked what they've seen from Kenny Pickett, which I don't know why. He looked great in the preseason, but they're going to go with Mitch, and Mason is the backup, and we'll see how long that lasts. Ultimately, I have this team going 7-10. I think they could potentially win a couple more games, maybe get to 500, steal a couple wins here or there. I think the beginning of their schedule is a little difficult with Cincinnati, obviously, and then playing against New England and Cleveland. That might be a little tough out of the gate, especially with Mitchell Trubisky. But they're an experienced team, especially an experienced defense, so they could probably steal a couple wins, maybe. And then when it gets that middle of the schedule where they play Buffalo, Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, New Orleans, really, really, really tough. And then later they play Las Vegas as well. So it'll be tough for them to steal a couple wins to get to 500. But I think 7-10 is ultimately kind of where they land. Next in the division, I have the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens are, again, another well-coached team. John Harbaugh is obviously going to be a positive. Really, he's just an excellent motivator, an excellent players coach. I think people and players really respond to him, and that's definitely something you want in a long-term head coach. So some more positive, obviously, Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's back, healthy. I think that injury that he had last year was a little bit more of a freak injury than people are wanting it to be, or not. I shouldn't say wanting. No one wants Lamar Jackson injured, but there are some naysayers out there who say that, you can't have a run first or a quarterback who runs more than they need to. Those kind of naysayers obviously are like, oh, well, here's his first injury. Here it is. This is where it starts. I think it was more of a freak injury. I think Lamar Jackson is more built than and he avoids contact well, as opposed to Cam Newton. Cam Newton was obviously really well built as well, really big, but Cam sought out contact, and Lamar is good at avoiding contact, stepping out of bounds, knowing when to protect himself. And he just continues to get better at throwing the football. He's each year, I think, gotten consistently more accurate, and I think that trend continues. I think he's far away from plateauing as a player. Next, their offensive line. Just a huge offensive line. They're one of those teams, much like the Green Bay Packers, who know how to draft offensive linemen. They go about it much differently than the Packers. The Packers are more, they like guys with versatility. The Ravens draft players for a specific position on their offensive line, and they stay to that position. And they're usually huge players. So I think their offensive line this year is going to be another positive for their team moving forward. And then another positive is the defense. Probably just going to take another step forward, getting healthy. If everyone comes back off of, their injuries, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, if those guys can come back and really be productive in their coming back from injury, then I think this defense will continue to be very good. The only player who's, again, kind of disappointed on this team, I think, has been Patrick Queen. I was, once again, really high on Patrick Queen coming out of LSU. He's just not panned out as a player yet. Obviously, don't want to give up on him yet. I believe it's his third season. Yeah, it's his third season, so you don't want to give up on a player, a first-round pick after 2 seasons. Give him time to develop. Middle linebacker is a tough position to come in and play in the NFL right away. It's not one of those positions that easily translates. Some negatives for this team. They've got a new defensive coordinator. They're going to switch to a different type of defense, more shell coverage, as opposed to Wink Martindale, who would blitz a ton and really put his corners kind of out on an island. They played a lot of single high or cover zero. They're not going to do that anymore, because I think when you don't have the horses for that defense, or the players, I should say, horses is kind of a figure of speech. Anyways, if you don't have the players for that defense like they didn't last season because of all the injuries, you can get really exposed, and that's kind of what happened and why they fell off as a defense. Next, their wide receiver group. Really unproven. I like Rashad Bateman coming out of Minnesota. I think he's going to have to step up and be that number one wide receiver for this team. Devin Duvernay has been okay. I liked him coming out of Texas. I mean, he as a later round prospect, but he was always kind of a two at best in my eyes, but probably a 3. Another negative, obviously, health concerns. When you have this many injuries, J.K. Dobbins is coming back. Ronnie Stanley's pretty old now. Like I said, Marcus Peters is coming off an injury. Marlon Humphrey's coming off an injury. I'm sure I'm missing someone else who's coming off an injury. But this team was the most hurt team in like 40 years, I think was the stat. When that happens, you still need to give these guys time to come back and really recover, and that takes a couple months. So they might start off slow. If they start off slow, I would be worried about where this team finishes. Ultimately, I had them finishing at 11-6. I do think they're that talented. Lamar Jackson is that good. They'll be able to overcome those injury concerns, even if guys aren't healthy and aren't 100% right away. I think they have a decently easy schedule as well. And I think they can steal some wins because they're really talented. Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh are a really scrappy combo. So I think they can steal some wins against Buffalo potentially. Obviously Cincinnati, New Orleans, I think is another good team. Denver, another good team they play, but they also kind of have an easier schedule. They play the Jets, New England, Miami, the Giants, Cleveland twice, Pittsburgh, Atlanta. In Jacksonville, I think they've got a good mixture of, they don't really play a lot of teams at their talent level. They either play teams who are much worse than them or better than them. So I think ultimately it comes out to 11-6. And finishing in first place in this division, I have the Cincinnati Bengals. A lot of people came out or in the offseason had this team as, showed a bunch of stats for why this team can regress. They kind of rely on low percentage plays, especially on offense. But if you have the players who are good enough for you to rely on those things, those low percentage plays, or those players who do that, like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, I think that regression is not as big of a deal. That being said, yeah, is that a stat that's concerning? Yes, it is concerning. Still, I have them finishing first. When you have Joe Burrow as your starting quarterback, who is, in my opinion, he's a bigger, a little bit more athletic Drew Brees. I think you can continue to be an accurate passer, continue to be, and you can continue to rely on those low percentage plays. So, and he's only ascending as a player and as a quarterback. He's by no means plateaued. He did come out of the draft a little old, so that is kind of concerning. Once again, you don't, you think maybe this is potentially his ceiling. I don't think it is. I think he's just going to get better, understand the NFL even more. He was only 3 points away from winning a Super Bowl, so I think he's shown enough to be considered one of those, definitely a top 10 quarterback, potentially pushing into top 5 position. Next, their skill position players: Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon. That's one of the absolute best wide receiver groups and running back tandem in the NFL, bar none. The wide receiver group, is probably the best in the group, at least the top 3. So Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, all of those guys could be number 1 wide receivers in many different offenses. So obviously, if you've got 3 of those guys, you're going to be throwing the ball a lot. You're going to be very successful with those low percentage plays. Next, the defense. I think the defense is very good. I wouldn't say it's great, but I do think it is very good, and it can play great. Trey Hendrickson, for them, picking him up from the Saints, I think has been really crucial to their success. I really like Jesse Bates as their safety. I think he's a really, really solid safety, potentially top 5 type safety. And then I know Eli Apple gets a ton of crap for being awful. He's really actually not that bad. He was just not great with the Giants, and so any player who's not great with a New York or an LA team automatically gets written off. I don't think he's that bad. He's been good. He's been decent for the Bengals. And then Chidobe Awuzie is kind of the same thing. He was only okay with the Cowboys, but he's been much better for the Bengals. I think that's also probably the weak point of their defense is their corner group. Next, for some negatives. Their offensive line, I don't think is going to be too much better this year. They've got a lot of guys who came in. They got Lyle Collins, Alex Kappa, those new guys coming in. And then Jonah Williams. I think Jonah Williams is the only holdover from that line from last season because they were so bad in the Super Bowl. That was the main reason why they lost that Super Bowl. I think if they had a marginally better offensive line, they could have won that Super Bowl easily. This year, I think it will be better, but it's still, as of right now, I think a negative on this team. Next, obviously, I talked about it. There is going to be some regression. When you rely and you get lucky with those low percentage plays, you tend to regress back to the mean. We'll see how far back that regression goes. Like I've said before, when you have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon, I think you can rely on those low percentage plays a little bit more than other teams, and you're not as affected by regression. And then again, I talked about another negative, kind of their cornerback group. It's only okay. I'm kind of nitpicking with this team. When you get to the teams who are winning the division and can win 10 plus games, you're kind of nitpicking a little bit at certain positions. So ultimately, I've got this team finishing at 12-5. I think that their schedule's not too difficult. I do think that they can pick up some good wins against Kansas City and against Tampa Bay late in the season. But obviously, when you play Buffalo, play Baltimore twice, you play Pittsburgh twice, And even Cleveland, to that extent, it's going to be a difficult run. But still, I think 12-5, they're a very talented team. They're a very good offense with a very good quarterback. When you have those things, I think you are set to go in the NFL. So let's go ahead and move on to the NFC East. Last place of the NFC East, I have probably no surprise here, the New York Jets. Let's start with some positives. I think their edge rushing group is really good with Carl Lawson coming back from injury. He was a player I was really excited to see coming from Cincinnati. He kind of had a breakout season his last season with Cincinnati, and unfortunately he got hurt, so that was really tough to see. I think John Franklin Myers, who they have starting opposite of him, had a really good camp. And then their first-round pick, Jermaine Johnson, out of Georgia and then Florida State, I think he'll really contribute to that rotation as well. I think they're really young. They've got a lot of young talent, which is awesome to see because they haven't. I mean, the Jets really have not drafted well for a long time, but right now I think that they're starting to get more talented each year. They drafted Sauce Gardner in I believe the fourth pick, if I'm correct. Yeah, the fourth pick. It's going a little bit crazy there. I forgot when he was drafted. Out of Cincinnati, I think he's just immediately a number one corner in the NFL. That's how I saw him coming out of Cincinnati, and I think he'll continue that in the NFL. He's just that good of a player. And then obviously, I think when you've got Garrett Wilson, you draft him early as well. Just two immediate impact players that you draft in the first round, and then, like I said, you draft Joe Johnson at the edge rusher position late in the first round. I think he'll have a nice impact in that rotation. And then they have some good offensive line talent as well with Elijah Vera Tucker, who I liked coming out of the draft. Right now they're starting George Fant at left tackle and then Max Mitchell at right. And then they've got Dwayne Brown, who they just signed. So they've got some good talent, and that Dwayne Brown signing was because he's escaping me right now, but they're really big left tackle, Mekhi Becton. That's who it was. Mekhi Becton got hurt, unfortunately, so he's probably going to be out for the season. Once, Mekhi Becton gets healthy and George Fant, they draft some more interior guys, I think the O-line will get better. But right now, they're just a little young. Some negatives. Zach Wilson, obviously, he's hurt still, but so that's going to really hamper his development. He needed the preseason to really get into a rhythm. And the fact that he missed virtually outside of a couple plays the 3 preseason games, and it's probably going to miss the first 4 games of the regular season, that's detrimental to a young quarterback who really needs as many reps as possible, not only for his confidence, but for the team's confidence in him. Like I just went over, their offensive line, I don't think is very good right now, especially with the Mekhi Becton injury, moving George Fant, from the right to the left and having Dwayne Brown come in. Maybe they'll move Fant back to right tackle and have Dwayne Brown at left tackle. We'll see. But outside of that, it's just Elijah Vera Tucker, and their center and left guard positions are kind of uncertain, is the best way to put it. And then the young wide receivers. They've got Corey Davis, who's probably their most experienced receiver. He's more of a 2 or 3, I think. And then Elijah Moore, his second season, we'll see what he can develop into as a slot guy. And then obviously Garrett Wilson. I like those players, but they're just really young, and not having that time with Zach Wilson is really going to hamper this offense's production and this offense's progression. So ultimately, I have them going 3-14. I just am not sure where they're going to pick up wins. The AFC East is pretty good, filled with a lot of average to above average teams. Outside of them, they play Baltimore in their first game. They've got a lot of difficult games playing the AFC North. And then they also play Green Bay, Denver. Obviously, when you play Buffalo twice, that's never fun. And then, Miami twice, New England twice. And Bill Belichick in New England, they just eat young quarterbacks for breakfast. So we'll see if this team can win more than 3 games. I think 4 games is probably their ceiling, honestly. I just don't see where they can pick up more games with this difficult schedule. Next in the division, I have the New England Patriots. The New England Patriots are a really confusing team, obviously, with their coordinator position. I'll get into that later. They're just another confusing team, so I have them ultimately finishing 3rd. Some positives, really like Mac Jones. I thought he had an excellent rookie season, and he's just a really rock-solid quarterback. Definitely a player who could take over and do what Tom Brady did for that team. Another positive, obviously, is Bill Belichick, greatest coach of all time. When you have him coaching up your team, they're going to be held to a certain standard. The Patriot way, I guess, is what you could call it. I just think they're a really good football team. They're coached really well. They're great. They're going to be great situationally. They don't have the most talent in the world right now, but when you are a great situational football team and you're coached really well, you can pick up a lot more games than what your talent may suggest that you have. Next, their offensive line. I think they've got a really good offensive line still. I know the Cole Strange picking a left guard who's probably projected to go in the 3rd or 4th round with your first overall pick. Sorry, not first overall, but your first round pick is very strange. No pun intended there, but actually the pun is definitely intended. Either way, picking Cole Strange with your first pick is not a direction that you want, that you would have wanted to see this team go. Would have liked to have seen them get Mac Jones a little bit more wide receiver talent, or potentially get some more talent on the defense. Some negatives. Who's calling offensive plays? Do I need to go any further? That's been highlighted, this whole offense. Who's going to call offensive plays for this team? Eventually, Bill's probably going to take over for Matt Patricia or Joe Judge or whoever the hell's doing it at some point, because the offense is probably not going to look good when you have Matt Patricia, who was your defensive coordinator and then went to Detroit and was awful calling your offensive plays. I don't know if he just wants to have people he likes and to work with be around him, and his kids, I guess, be his coaching staff, but definitely very strange and not good to have your second-year quarterback have someone who is a defensive coordinator calling offensive plays. And then also, again, switching up your scheme. So it's not even the same power run scheme. They're trying to do an outside zone scheme. So on top of switching offensive coordinators or having a defensive coordinator call your offensive plays, you're running the whole brand new scheme with that. So that they really don't even have the personnel for. So that's really concerning if you're a Patriots fan. Next was another negative, some defensive turnover. Lots of guys left, and that kind of just happens in this scheme. J.C. Jackson leaves. One of the McCourty's retired. So, yeah, they were kind of really crucial to what this team did defensively last season. I believe in the coaching of Bill Belichick being able to make players better than what they actually are. So they'll hopefully be able to overcome that, but this defense right now looks a lot worse than it did last season. Next, kind of their skill position group. I like Ramondre Stevenson. They're currently backup running back. Right now they have Damon Harris starting. I'm not really sure what this wide receiver group is going to look like. Devontae Parker's probably their best receiver. Nelson Aguilar, Jacoby Myers, they're kind of weird third or fourth gadget receivers. I think Nelson Aguilar kind of probably fooled the Patriots into giving him a lot of money when he had that season with the Raiders because of just kind of how Derek Carr relied on him and how Derek Carr is as a quarterback. So, and the two tight ends that they signed, I like them. I don't know why they signed both Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. Kind of really weird. I would have just rather them sign one and kind of focus on that one tight end. But I guess they're trying to replace Gronk in a way with both of those guys, but neither of those guys are even close to what Gronk was for that team. So very strange. So ultimately, strange season for New England. I still think the positives of Mac Jones, Bill Belichick can get this team, and obviously being in a division with the Jets, this team can still finish around 500 at 8-9. That's where I've got them. They face, a really tough beginning of their schedule. Miami, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Green Bay right out the gate is tough. I'm not sure where they're going to pick up wins there, especially when it's at Miami, at Pittsburgh, at Green Bay. 3 of your first 4 games away against good teams or teams of similar talent, similar talent in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's probably a little bit better than New England, at least defensively, and that's going to be tough on a brand new offense. So ultimately, I've got them going 8-9, picking up some wins against Arizona, one against Buffalo. So 8-9's, I think, probably their ceiling. Next in this division, I've got the Miami Dolphins. Some positives for Miami right off the bat. Their wide receivers. They've got one of the better wide receiver rooms in the NFL. Obviously, when you bring in Tyreek Hill, you already have Jalen Waddle, and you also have Cedric Wilson. You're going to have a lot of speed on this team, a lot of yards after the catch players, and that's going to really help Tua get the ball out of his hands quickly, which is something that he needs to do, I think, to be successful in the NFL. Another positive for this team is the defense. They've got one of the better corner groups in the NFL with Xavier Howard and Byron Jones. I think they've got a really solid corner group. I like their edge rusher. I think Jalen Phillips can take another step forward coming out of the University of Miami. And then they picked up Melvin Ingram, who I think will be really good as an edge rusher on that team as well. And then they've got their safety, Javon Holland out of Oregon. I liked him a lot. So I think this defense is really solid, and it'll just continue to improve as the year goes on. Another thing that has improved, really just improving by getting 2 players. You've got Connor Williams, who they moved to center. I think the Cowboys kind of wanted him to potentially be a tackle when they drafted him, and he's just not really suited for that in the NFL. I think his athletic profile definitely fit more of a guard or center, and for whatever reason, they didn't value that, and I think they're really going to regret not re-signing him. And then they've got Terron Armstead, who they brought over from the Saints at left tackle, really going to help Tua and his progression as a quarterback this season. Unfortunately, they still have Austin Jackson starting at right tackle, and maybe Liam Eichenberg can get better. I really liked him coming out of Notre Dame. Obviously, he played tackle there. They moved him to guard. He fits kind of more of that guard profile. So we'll see what those two guys, if those two guys can get better. But just bringing in Terran Armstead and Connor Williams by itself is an upgrade to your offensive line. Some negatives: brand new coaching staff with Mike McDaniel. Now they're going to kind of run more of a wide zone scheme, probably some more RPOs, things like that to get the ball out of Tua's hands. We'll see how many deep shots they want to run. Obviously, Tyreek Hill, that's what he wants to do. Jalen Waddle, both those guys, they want to go deep. They want to run and catch those deep passes. Tua's arm is not the greatest in the world. In fact, I would probably consider it a bottom tier arm in the NFL, but he is a very accurate passer. So if they, as long as I think Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are getting those touches that they want, I think they'll be happy. Another negative, kind of touched on it already, Tua. Coming out of Alabama, I think I was a little bit higher on him than I should have been. I kind of got caught up in the Tua mania there out of the draft. And I was kind of battling between him and Justin Herbert early in the draft process. And then I saw Justin Herbert actually throwing live and at the combine, and that completely changed my mind. I was like, oh no, Justin Herbert's like way different. Like he's completely different from Tua. And that's kind of when I thought Herbert would be a much better prospect, and Tua was clearly the third best quarterback in that draft class. And I think the Dolphins made a mistake, obviously not taking Herbert and instead taking Tua. They kind of, I think, the Dolphins as a franchise are not a very good franchise. They're a very reactive franchise. It's something I've kind of noticed with them. They take big swings one way or the other, and they usually fail. So I think, but also that's kind of helped them. That's how they got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and some of these other players like Byron Jones and Xavier Howard. They've taken those big swings, and sometimes they hit, but a lot of times it doesn't hit. Now, if Tua can improve his processing speed and really be accurate with the football, he can turn his negative status into a positive. And then their running backs. I don't know what they're doing with their running backs. It's probably going to be Edmonds who's going to start. I know they have Raheem Mostert there as well. I don't know what that's going to look like. Obviously, if you're coming from the Kyle Shanahan system and you really want to take that Kyle Shanahan approach, and if Mike McDaniel is that type of running game guru, then really anybody can be a running back in that scheme. So again, that could go from a negative into a positive. The Miami Dolphins have a lot of negatives right now that could be potential positives, and I can't say that for a lot of other teams, especially in this division. So right now I've got the Miami Dolphins going 10-7. I do think they get a couple surprise wins at Baltimore, at Cincinnati. I think they're talented enough to upset a lot of really good teams, but they just won't have the consistency to beat teams at their level or consistently beat teams below them. They're young. Tua is really up and down. And unless he can fix that, I think that's kind of where they stand at middle, a little bit above average. Next, I have winning the division, the Buffalo Bills. Positives, obviously Josh Allen, MVP type quarterback, the betting favorite for MVP. Not much I really need to say about him. He's probably got one of the strongest arms in NFL history, and he's just continuing to get more accurate, make better decisions. He is a lot more athletic than I thought he was coming out of Wyoming. So it's really surprising to see him hurdle people, run past people, run over people. I kind of forgot how big he was until I watched the match this year with Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, and Tom Brady, and he was by far the biggest guy out of all of them. And Tom's a pretty tall guy, but he was tiny in comparison to Josh Allen. So, when you're 6'5", 6'6", 250 pounds as a quarterback, and you're as athletic and you have that mindset that he has, really, really going to be tough for opposing defenses, obviously. And then I think another positive is the defense. The defense just got better. It's probably going to be the best defense in the NFL. When you bring in Von Miller, what he showed with the Rams, I think really told people that he's got a lot left in the tank. And we shouldn't have defined him by what we saw at the tail end of his Broncos career. Obviously, he was a little ransacked by injury as well, which is unfortunate. But he's kind of had another career resurgence here with the Rams last season, and probably the reason why they won the Super Bowl was Von Miller. It was getting Von Miller late, halfway through the season there at the trade deadline. I think they've got the best safety duo in the league with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. They've got one of the better cornerback rooms. I think Dane Jackson is coming along, and they're starting Christian Benford right now. They've got the rookie out of Florida, whose name is escaping me. I really liked him coming out of the draft as well. So I think they've got a lot of talent, obviously, and then you've got Ed Oliver on the defensive line. They've got a great linebacker group with Matt Milano, Tremaine Edmonds. They're just really talented defense. Another positive is they have an established culture. They have had the same coaching staff with Sean McDermott now for, I think this is their 4th year, and they've really established the culture of that team. Obviously, when you have a team like Buffalo and Northern New York, where football's really all that town has, all that area has, you're going to already have, much like the Green Bay Packers, you're just going to have a really passionate fan base that kind of establishes your culture for you. You know, you can come in and coaching staffs will change and talent will come and go, but as long as you've got that passionate fan base that will kind of root for you through thick and thin. There's been a lot of thick lately, or a lot of thin, really, I should say, with the Buffalo Bills as a franchise, especially the early two. Ever since they lost those 4 Super Bowls, they've been a pretty atrocious team up until very recently with Josh Allen. So, and they were always a passionate fan base, you know, through the Fitzpatrick era, Tyrod Taylor there for a little bit. They've always been a really, really passionate team. Some negatives. I think the loss of Brian Daboll to the Giants is going to hurt this team a little bit. They're going to try and run the same type of offense. But I think Brian Daboll really was an excellent play caller, play designer, especially for the wide receivers and fitting what Josh Allen does well. But I do think their run game will probably get a little bit better. And that was another negative here. I'm going to put in the negative again. With these really great teams, I'm nitpicking. They're so talented. There's not a whole lot I can pick on and pick out of this team to really be a negative. So I'm going to kind of pick the running game here. I'm not sure what it looks like. I've always been a big Devin Singletary fan, and I kind of thought they've kept bringing in other players to replace him ever since they drafted him in the 3rd round in 2019. Obviously, I go to UNT. He was at Florida Atlantic. It's in the same conference. He destroyed UNT every single year. Every single time we played Florida Atlantic, he just ran all over us. So I've always kind of been a big Devin Singletary fan. And hopefully they just kind of stick with him. I know they have Zach Moss and they brought in James Cook from Georgia. But I honestly think Devin Singletary is the best out of those guys. Zach Moss just hasn't really shown what he showed in college, so that's definitely been unfortunate, but we'll see what the run game looks like now with their new offensive coordinator. They've also had some offensive line turnover. They keep Deion Dawkins, who's good, but they brought in Roger Saffold, and they kept Ryan Bates, but we'll see. I mean, it's just one of the weaker points of the team, in my opinion. But they've got so much else going for the team with Dawson Knox and Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen. Your offensive line doesn't have to be the greatest in the world, and the defense is so good. Again, I'm really kind of picking out little things about this team that would be positives for other teams. Ultimately, I've got this team going 14-3. I really do think that Vegas is right, that they should be the betting favorites to go to the Super Bowl. I do think that they're that talented of a football team. And they even have a really hard schedule, playing at LA to start the season, Tennessee, at Miami, at Baltimore, which I think will be one of their losses, and then at Kansas City. That's a really, really, really tough first 6 games. And they play Green Bay later, and then they kind of get into their division here a little bit with New England, Jets, Miami, which their end of season schedule is quite light. I think they'll pick up a lot of wins there at the end of the season. So 14-3, I think, is a little bit of an upside pick, but I don't see them losing any more than 12 games unless Josh Allen gets hurt. Next, we'll move on to the AFC South. So the worst team, I think, in this division right now is the Houston Texans. They're clearly in rebuild mode. When you trade Deshaun Watson, obviously for good reason, you kind of have to just restart the franchise. Their talent was kind of running out as well. They didn't really run the franchise great before this new regime, or this second regime since Deshaun Watson. But I do like Lovie Smith as a coach. When he was with the Bears, I always thought they had a great culture, and he's a pretty underrated coach. I don't think he's going to get he's going to have a good tenure, unfortunately, with the Texans, just because of the nature of what they're doing there. But hopefully, they will stick with him long term, because I really do think he develops young talent well, and I really think he cares, and I think he's a great players coach. So some more positives. I think they've got a lot of young talent. I like Davis Mills. Right now, he's a below average quarterback for me, who has the potential to become an average quarterback, potentially top 15, I think is kind of his ceiling. So going from Deshaun Watson and then kind of picking up Davis Mills and having him be a surprise from the 3rd round is really nice. Obviously, they still have Laramie Tunsil, who was probably one of the worst trades I've seen in a long time. When you trade for a guy and give up all those picks and then also have to pay him top dollar, that's just never what you want to do. They've got Brandon Cooks still, so some older talent there. I like Dameon Pierce, who they got, the running back who they have. It looks like he's going to take a majority of the snaps, hopefully. I know they've been kind of talking about Rex Burkhead taking snaps as well, so hopefully Dameon Pierce takes more snaps. You just give the young guys at this point, this franchise is kind of at that point where they just need to give young guys snaps. I like Derek Stingley Jr. out of LSU. I thought he had probably the best physical profile and probably the best tape when he was healthy out of any cornerback in the draft. And there are tons of great quarterbacks. I like Jalen. I believe Peter is how it's pronounced, or Petrie, out of Baylor. I thought he was definitely a player who was kind of undervalued in the draft. He could play free safety, strong safety, slot, can do a lot of things. I think this team has a bright future ahead of it, but right now it's just not there. Just play those young guys, get them as many reps as possible for whenever you bring in more talent, whether that's through the draft. Obviously, they're going to have multiple draft picks with trading Deshaun Watson, or if they can somehow, bring in some veterans. Houston's a nice city, and if they have a nice culture here with Lovie Smith, who's a really respected coach, maybe they can bring in some more veteran talent, top-end veteran talent, because I know they've kind of done this thing where they are doing a purposeful tank where they'll sign a lot of middling, older veterans and just kind of trotting them out there and seeing how many games they can lose. Some negatives. I think right now Davis Mills is probably a negative for this team. He has a lot to improve on. He's a young quarterback, makes a lot of I wouldn't say bad decisions. I don't want to say bad decisions, but a lot of young quarterback decisions, a lot of young quarterback mistakes. Hopefully he can clean those up. Obviously, when you have so much coaching staff turnover, the last regime only got 1 year. We'll see how much time Lovie Smith gets. Hopefully it's more than the last regime. Like I said, I really do like Lovie Smith as a head coach, and I do think he deserves a second chance in the league. And then obviously just they're not a very talented group at this point in time. Outside of their young draft picks who they got last year and this year, just not a lot else around the team. So ultimately I have them finishing 2-15. Just don't know where they're going to pick up wins. Maybe they'll be more scrappy than I'm giving them credit for, but as of right now, I think they're just a bottom tier team, and they've got a difficult schedule. So those two things combined, 2-15 is what I have their record at. Next in the division, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm probably a little bit higher on this team than a lot of others. Obviously, when you have number 1 overall pick Trevor Lawrence from not this year's draft, obviously, but last year's draft, you're going to have high expectations for that team at some point unless they just completely screw up their draft and completely screw up the team building, which I don't think they've done. Obviously, when you get rid of Urban Meyer, we'll just kind of go into the positives now. When you get rid of Urban Meyer, bring in Doug Peterson, who's an actual adult and an actual coach in the NFL, coaching staff, knows who players are, you're going to be a lot better than you were last season. Another positive I have is Trevor Lawrence. I think Trevor Lawrence can take another step moving forward. Hopefully, if from a first-round draft pick, you want that player to continue to get better every single year, especially on that rookie deal. And I do think that he'll continue to get better, make less mistakes. I think last season was a lot of him trying out what he can do in the NFL and seeing how fast defenders are. He's always had great pocket presence, and that I think will continue this year. He'll continue to get better, continue to make better decisions, and you'll probably see less turnovers than last season. Another positive for this team, I think they've got a great defensive line and great edge rushers with Josh Allen, obviously, this is his fourth season now, and then you draft Trayvon Walker again with the number 1 overall pick. You're going to have a really good edge rusher group. I like what they did moving Arden Key to the inside. I thought that was really interesting when they picked him up, and then they drafted Trayvon Walker. I was like, oh, I guess Key's going to be a rotational guy. Nope, they're just going to put him at defensive tackle. I gained a little bit of weight. And they're going to have a really, really, really nice pass rush this season. Some negatives for this team. The wide receiver group is pretty unknown. I don't want to say unknown because Christian Kirk is a pretty known commodity in the NFL, but they're kind of paying him as a number 1. Do I think he's actually number 1? I don't believe it yet. I'll see it when I believe it, but and they're paying him a lot of money. They're paying him a lot of money to be that number 1. They brought in Zay Jones, who's probably a 3. They've got Marvin Jones Jr., who's a decent 2. It's kind of just a lot of guys who sort of do the same thing. So we'll see what this offense looks like with that wide receiver group. The offensive line is not great. I know they brought in Brandon Scherf, but outside of that, it's a lot of the same group with Cam Robinson. When Cam Robinson's your left tackle, that's not great. And then Jawan Taylor, your right tackle, he's just kind of been up and down, and we'll see if he can kind of improve. But when those guys are your tackles, that's not necessarily a good sign for your team this season. Obviously, I think that's probably something they want to focus on going into next season. Some other negatives, again, I talked about it already. They're young. We'll see what Travis Etienne is like, the running back out of Clemson, who is Trevor Lawrence's teammate. We'll see what he looks like coming off his ACL. We'll see what the wide receiver group looks like with Christian Kirk, who's still relatively young. And then obviously Trevor Lawrence is a young quarterback. Ultimately, I have them finishing 8-9. I think they have an easy enough schedule. And I think that Trevor Lawrence is a good enough quarterback for them to finally hit that 500 mark and start to turn this franchise around. I had them picking up some surprise wins against Baltimore. And then I think I have them beating Tennessee twice. And no, I have them beating Tennessee once and losing to Kansas City. So they've got a tough schedule, but I think they can beat Indianapolis once and Baltimore and pick up some wins against Dallas. And they've got some other obviously worse teams than them. So 8-9, I think, is a safe bet for them. Some other team, the next team, in the conference, I have the Titans. Obviously, positives, Derrick Henry. Everything that we've heard coming out of camp is that Derrick Henry's good to go, which is crazy for a running back of his size and his age, coming back from a Liz Frank injury, and everyone's like, oh yeah, Derrick Henry's just fine. No worry about it. No worries. He looks totally great. Looks like Derrick Henry. That's crazy to me. For him to be that old, that big, and to come back from a Liz Frank injury in seemingly no time at all and be completely fine. Another positive is they have a really established culture under Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel's he's turned this team into just, I guess, to kind of be cliche, a gritty team who wins a lot of close games. They're really good situationally. He played for Bill Belichick. He never coached under Bill, but he played for Bill, and Bill's obviously great situationally, as I covered before. He's kind of turned the Titans into that sort of team. They may not have the best talent everywhere on their roster. They may not have the best quarterback in Ryan Tannehill, but they're going to be great situationally. Another positive, I do think this is going to be a good defense again this year. I like Kevin Byard as one of the better corners in the league, one of the better safeties in the league. I like Jeffrey Simmons as one of the absolute best interior defensive linemen in the league. I have always liked Harold Landry as an outside rusher. They brought back Bud Dupree. We'll see how he does. I think they've got Christian Fulton at corner, and I think they're also starting Roger McCreary right now because of some injuries. I really liked him coming out of the draft as well. So I think definitely got quite a bit of talent on their defense. Some negatives. Right now, Ryan Tannehill's kind of a negative. He's a lot like Kirk Cousins, where he kind of has to be schemed into playing well. And outside of scheme, he tends to make bad decisions or throw the ball away. He'll tend to make his first read's not open. Sometimes he moves to his second read. If not, he kind of just tucks and goes. And obviously he's kind of at this point in his career, he's plateaued as a quarterback. He's 34 now, almost 35. That's crazy to me to think, because I remember when he came into the league from Texas A&M and was drafted by the Miami Dolphins. So it's crazy to me now that he's 34. Another negative I have is their wide receiver group. I just don't know what it's going to look like now without A.J. Brown. I know they drafted Kyle Phillips, who they really like, and Traylon Burks, who's kind of had a rough start to camp. And they've got Robert Woods coming over from L.A., but he's coming off of an injury. So I'm really, really concerned about this wide receiver group and what it's going to look like in this offense. But obviously when you have Derrick Henry, you really just want to make sure that those guys can block for Derrick Henry. Another negative I have is health regression. This team, Derrick Henry especially, is old. Ryan Tannehill, old. Robert Woods, old. all of those guys have had significant injuries in their knees, or their foot in Derrick Henry's case. So if those guys start to break down late in the season, those are all really, really important players on their team. Taylor Lewan's coming back from an ACL. Like, they just have so many older players coming back from injuries. So we'll see if they can stay healthy throughout the entire season. So ultimately, I have them regressing a little bit. I think they're going to finish one game over Jacksonville at 9-8, and the second seed in this division is going to ultimately come down to that last game at Jacksonville, which I think, just because of Tennessee's experience, they're going to win. But I have them really struggling to begin the season. I have them losing at New York. New York at home, at Buffalo, against Las Vegas, at Indianapolis. That's, I think, 4 straight losses right off the bat, and they kind of start to hit their stride there towards the middle of the season when the schedule gets a little bit easier. So 9-8 ultimately, I think, is probably where they end up. And then finishing in first for this division, I have the Indianapolis Colts. Some positives: new quarterback, got rid of Carson Wentz. That didn't last long. Obviously, when you have as bad of a game as he had against Jacksonville to end the season, it's winning, you're in the playoffs, and you have your absolute worst game of the season. And towards the end of the year, they just stopped running, or they just stopped letting Carson Wentz throw the football, and they were just running the football with Jonathan Taylor. So obviously, when you replace that with Matt Ryan, who I think is a definite upgrade. Again, he is a little bit older, so that is kind of difficult, but I just think even at 37 years old, he's just a marked improvement over Wentz as a player. Another positive I have for this team, obviously, we already talked about him, Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is just like the best running back in the NFL, and he's one of the few running backs who I would trust. Him and Derrick Henry are the 2 running backs who I would trust to carry a full workload as the only running back on a team. And on top of that, they've got dudes behind him like Nyheim Hines, who I think will do a lot in the passing game. So they just have a really good running back room, obviously, with Jonathan Taylor. And then I think their defense. The only negative I have with this defense is Gus Bradley. I don't know why Gus Bradley continues to get jobs in the NFL. His defenses haven't been good since the cover 3 defense was popular when Seattle was running it. He continues to run the same defense and refuses to change it at any point, even though everyone has that defense figured out now. But outside of scheme, they've got a lot of great talent. I think when you bring on Stephon Gilmore to be a boundary corner, you've got now Shaquille Leonard at middle linebacker, and they've got a lot of talent. DeForest Buckner along their defensive line especially. And then they got Kwity Paye, second-year guy out of Michigan. I think they've got a lot of talent on their defense. So ultimately, I have them as the best team in the division and finishing 12-5. I just think the improvement of Matt Ryan over Carson Wentz is just going to make this already talented roster so much better. And then, I didn't go over the negatives. The other negative I have for this team outside of Gus Bradley are the wide receivers. Michael Pittman Jr., I like him. Don't know if he's a number 1. Paris Campbell has not really been healthy his entire career. There's always a ton of hype around Paris Campbell being a really speedy slot guy, possession guy, gadget receiver. And that just has yet to happen. And then Alec Pierce, obviously the rookie, coming from Cincinnati, really raw, really, really big, fast boundary receiver, but he's definitely raw as a route runner, and we'll see if he can contribute right away, because they're going to kind of need him to. But like I said, ultimately, I still think this is the best team in the NFL with Matt Ryan, Jonathan Taylor, and the amount of defensive talent they have, they're just much better than any other team in this division. So I have them going 12-5 and picking up some pretty important wins against Kansas City. And their schedule is also really not that hard outside of playing Kansas City and Philadelphia and Las Vegas. It's really not that difficult. So I have them beating Kansas City, I have them beating Dallas, and I have them beating Philadelphia and Las Vegas. So I just think that they're a really, really, really solid team. I just hope that Gus Bradley defense doesn't come back and bite them. And now we're going to move into the last division in the previews. And there's a reason I saved this division for last, because it is by far the best division in football. Really not close. I think each one of these teams in this division, the AFC West, for those who don't know, could be a playoff team or could be the best team in a different division if they weren't all in the AFC West. So it kind of sucks that I have to rank all these teams and I have to put, one or two of these teams missing the playoffs, or maybe three missing the playoffs. You never know. I don't think that's going to happen. I do think we're going to see multiple playoff teams out of this division. But without further ado, AFC West. In last place, I have the Las Vegas Raiders. Positives. Just traded for Davante Adams. Best wide receiver in football. Not even close in my opinion. Am I a little biased? Sure. But also, a lot of NFL players, NFL analysts say the same thing as me. Does he have the same deep speed as Tyreek Hill? No. Do some people prefer that? Sure. But I still think Davante Adams is fast enough to get the top off the defense, and also he's just by far the best route runner in the NFL, bar none. I mean, I don't even think it's close. I know a lot of people say Keenan Allen is a close second, Justin Jefferson is a close second. I don't even think it's close. I think it's just Davante Adams without a doubt, in my opinion. Another positive, I think Darren Waller is a really, really awesome tight end, and I think there was a little bit too much pressure on him last season because they just had Hunter Renfrow really outside of him. And I think a lot of teams were double teaming him and not letting Derek Carr throw to him. So I think with Davante Adams there, Darren Waller is going to get a lot of single coverage. One of those two guys, you can't double both guys because they're too good. You can't double both of them. So one of them is going to get single coverage on an important play. And obviously Derek Carr is a good enough quarterback to get the ball to either one of those guys if they're in single coverage. Another positive, both of their pass rushers. I mean, getting Chandler Jones from the Arizona Cardinals is just an absolute steal and a really, really, really crucial improvement to this defense. And then obviously when you've got Max Crosby already there, who was a breakout player last season, I think if you've got those two edge rushers in this division, that's kind of a trend, is pretty much every team in this division has really good edge rushers, two really good edge rushers. So I think it was important for them to get Chandler Jones. Some negatives I have for this team. Their offensive line is awful. They traded away Alex Leatherwood, or they just cut him. Sorry, they didn't even trade him. They tried to trade him, and they couldn't, so they just cut him. And he was a first-round pick for them 2 years ago. And to have him be cut, not play any position, like I didn't have him as a tackle or a first-round prospect coming out of Alabama, I believe is where he came out of. Yeah, Alabama. I didn't have him as a tackle, but I thought he would be a very good, very powerful guard or center. So to see him just get outright cut is really concerning to see. I think the only good offensive lineman they have is Colton Miller, who's their left tackle. So I guess at least you've got Derek Carr's blind side covered, but the rest of these guys is really, really rough. really, really rough. Next, another negative, I think their DBs are not that great. I know they picked up Rock Ya-Sin from the Colts. I think he'll help them improve. Jonathan Abram just hasn't really been able to, one, stay healthy, two, really kind of live up to his billing where he was drafted. Again, this John Gruden, Mike Mayock draft era, obviously the new regime hates it because they've tried to get rid of everybody and they didn't accept any fifth-year options on any of those guys. So kind of the Khalil Mack trade as a result of that was pretty useless for this team. I like Trevon Moehrig out of TCU. I thought he was really good, but he's probably the only DB I really, really like out of this group. Another negative I have for this team is it's a new scheme on offense and defense. Brand new coaching staff. We'll see. For a lot of these teams, I think that is kind of my concern, the ones that are bringing new coaching staffs. I just think that there's always a little bit of a learning curve, and they didn't play a lot of their start. I don't really think they played any starters in the preseason, except for maybe some guys here on the offensive line. To be honest, I really didn't pay too much attention to their preseason. I didn't watch their preseason tape. I kind of just listened to what reporters have been saying and kind of going off what I watched of them last year. So we'll see what this team looks like in a brand new scheme and a brand new coaching staff. Still, with that being said, I still have this team at 500 going 9-8. They are too good to be anything less than 500. I truly do think that 9-8 is like their floor, unless there are injuries or the scheme, something goes wrong with the scheme, it doesn't fit, or Derek Carr is just way worse than we all thought. So I do have them beating some good teams, but really it's mostly teams that are worse than them. I do have them beating San Francisco late in the year, but I think it's probably a better team than them. But I just don't think this team is quite at the same talent level as the other teams in this division, especially along the offensive line, for me to put them any higher and to put them first or second in this division. Next, kind of a surprise here, but as I was going through the schedule and the rosters, I've got the Kansas City Chiefs finishing third in this division. First, we'll start out with the positives. Patrick Mahomes, generational quarterback, one of the top 1, 2, or 3 quarterbacks in the NFL. Just depends what you kind of like, what you prefer out of a quarterback, But obviously, he is a premier talent. He's going to go down as one of the greatest. I think he's already got a gold jacket. I think anyone who says that he doesn't is kind of stupid. So obviously, he's going to be a positive for this team. Next, you've got the coaching staff, especially the offensive coaching staff. Well, I'd say the defensive coaching staff as well. I think Steve Spagnuolo is a really good defensive coordinator who knows how to scheme his players, and kind of cover up his weaker players and make and play to the strengths of his better players. But obviously, the offensive staff with Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, they've been doing this so long. They know how to coach teams and get their team prepared for the season. So I think that that's kind of one of the reasons why I think this team is even close to the other teams in this division. And I'll get into that later when we start getting into the negatives and why I think this team is going to finish third. Next, another positive, the offensive line. Their revamped offensive line that they fixed after they lost the Super Bowl and just got, even that Super Bowl they won against the 49ers, I mean, Mahomes is under pressure. And, it's kind of hard to put that all on the offensive line. Patrick Mahomes does have a tendency to just take these long drops that are just unnecessary. So a lot of the edge rushers have kind of figured that out. And so they're just kind of running past these offensive line and these tackles and just running straight into Mahomes because he's taking these really deep drops. So, but still, I think the offensive line is very good. When you're bringing Joe Thuney, you have Creed Humphrey, who's one of the best centers in the NFL. You've got Orlando Brown Jr., who went from right tackle with the Ravens now to left tackle. I think he's actually really, really kept up that status as a premier tackle, even moving from right to left, which is something that's hard to do. And then they've got Andrew Wiley, who they've had for a while at right tackle. Just a really good offensive line in general. Some negatives. So here's kind of where I may disagree with some people. I think outside of Travis Kelce, I'm really, really worried about this wide receiver group and the running backs that they have. Obviously, Travis Kelce is going to get the majority of the snaps, or obviously the majority of the snaps at tight end, but he's going to get most of the attention in this offense. He is one of the best tight ends in NFL history, and obviously I don't think that's going to change this year, even though he's a little bit older now. I think he's 32, almost 33, so that's a little tough to see. But I think, they bring in Marquez Valdes-Scantling from Green Bay. It's kind of at the best, a number 2, really a 3. Bringing Juju Smith-Schuster, who hasn't really been good with the Steelers for a while. And, is that his fault, or is that really Ben Roethlisberger's fault and the Steelers' fault? That's kind of up for debate. We'll see. When he was with Antonio Brown, he was great as a number 2. Do I think he can be a 1? No. And then they kept Nicole Hardman, so that's good. They still have him, but do I think he's a number 1? No. And so, yeah, that's a little concerning. It is a little concerning now to not have Tyreek Hill and then kind of replace him sort of in the aggregate with Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and some draft picks. So I would watch out for that group. They're going to beat up on bad teams and teams with new coaching staffs, especially new defensive staffs. So that's not surprising. That wouldn't be surprising, but ultimately I just think that the lack of talent in that room as a whole, or that group as a whole, is pretty concerning. Also, another thing here, I think that they're going to be relying on their rookie class a lot more than other really talented teams who are competing for Super Bowls. They drafted George Karlaftis out of Purdue, who I really liked. I thought he was a little bit more developmental, but they're having him start right away, and they really need him to produce right away, because they've had Frank Clark now here for a while from San Francisco, and he's kind of just gotten worse every year he's been with the Chiefs, and he is not the same player he used to be. It's basically just Chris Jones on that defensive line. So they really need to get some edge production from Karlaftis, and he's going to be stepping into an extremely important role right away. Same thing with Trent McDuffie. I think he's probably going to start opposite of L'Jarius Sneed, who I think was kind of a steal for them. They got really lucky with L'Jarius Sneed and how he's panned out. And Juan Thornhill, how he's panned out as well. Those guys that they've kind of drafted in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, later rounds, things like that. They brought in Justin Reed from Houston, which I do like. I always thought he was kind of underrated with Houston. So, but outside of that, like I said, they're going to really rely on Karlaftis, Trent McDuffie, Leo Chenal from Wisconsin, who I did like as a player. But these guys have major roles on this team, and it is And that is a little concerning to me. And then I just think overall, I kind of beat the dead horse on this one, but I just think their defensive talent outside of a few select guys like Chris Jones, Juan Thornhill, and Nick Bolton, there's not much. And the talent that they do have is rookie talent. So that is very concerning. Also, now getting into the schedule. They, in my opinion, have the absolute hardest schedule in the NFL, bar none, not even close. It's not close. Every team that they play is outside of Seattle and like Jacksonville, I guess. Jacksonville, Houston, Seattle are all really, really good, competent, above average teams. They start off in Arizona. I think that's probably the worst defense they're going to play this season, honestly. So I expect them to win there. And then they go straight into the Chargers, then at Indianapolis, Tampa Bay, Las Vegas, Buffalo, San Francisco. That's just a gauntlet of just defensive. Oh my God. Indianapolis, Tampa Bay, Buffalo, San Francisco. Las Vegas is by far the worst defense of that. And then the Chargers, Las Vegas is by far the worst defense of that stretch. And they still have probably two of the best edge rushers in the NFL. And then after they got a bye week in week 8, and they play Tennessee and Jacksonville. Tennessee's going to be a tough defense, and they always play Kansas City well. Jacksonville, they'll probably get a win there because Jacksonville's young. But then they play the Chargers, the Rams, Cincinnati, Denver, and they get a little bit of break with Houston and Seattle, but then Denver and Las Vegas again. They just have such a brutal schedule. And with there not being as much talent and relying on young players more this season than ever, I do think that they'll take a considerable step back this season. So I have them going 9-8. And we'll see later when I reveal the playoff rankings. We'll see if I have them making the playoffs. Second in the division, I've got the Denver Broncos. This is one of the teams with a newer coaching staff that I'm a little bit higher on than others. Maybe, again, that could be a little bit of bias with Nathaniel Hackett. I thought Hackett brought a lot to the Packers and was pretty underrated as a offensive mind, especially what he did with the Blake Bortles Jacksonville Jaguars, getting that offense to the AFC Championship game. I think he really should be praised for what he did with that team and what he did with that offense with Blake Bortles. Now he's got Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson is a much better quarterback than anything Denver has had recently, and obviously way better than what Nate Hackett had in Jacksonville. So I think, but again, I will say it's a new scheme. I am nervous about teams' new schemes and new coaching staffs, and that first round of games that they play. But that being said, still Russell Wilson. He's still a top 10 quarterback in this league, he's probably not top 3, top 5 anymore like he used to be, but still top 10 and in the better side of the top 10, the closer to 5 than he is to 10. Again, and then now this defense as well. I love this defense. They've got Pat Surtain, who's I think one of the better corners already in the NFL. Nick Chubb, who's a great outside linebacker. Randy Gregory, who they've got from Dallas. I am a little concerned with their inside linebacker group. I'm not gonna lie, and maybe their defensive interior could be a little bit better. They got DJ Jones and Dramont Jones. They're okay, and their safety group is also okay. But I think when you've got Ronald Darby and Pat Surtain as your outside corners, you're going to be fine. And then another positive, I like their skill position players: Javonte Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, KJ Hamler, the injury to Tim Patrick really sucks for this team. Otherwise, they'd probably have, again, they'd be up there with, I think, Cincinnati in terms of wide receiver groups. I really like Sutton at SMU. I think he's probably going to be Russell Wilson's favorite target in this offense just because he's that big, deep threat like DK Metcalf. And I think you'll also like KJ Hamler quite a bit because he's more Tyler Lockett speed. I'm curious to see what Jerry Jeudy looks like in this offense, if he takes more of a vertical, if he has more of a vertical route tree than he did in years past. I'm sure with this type of offense, still it's going to be a little bit more rhythm-based. They're probably going to have some more deep shots because that's what Russ likes to throw, stuff outside the numbers. I'm sure he'll have a more vertical route tree, probably run some more slot fades, things like that. Negatives, obviously, like I mentioned before, it's a new coaching staff. As much as I do like the people that they brought in, a lot of former Packers staff members, things like that, I do, but it's a new coaching staff. It's going to be difficult to get Russ to conform to that staff and conform to what they want to do. Also, their offensive line, little questionable. I think Garrett Bowles had a really rough start to his career and then got much better in his fourth, fifth season. So I think I can continue to see him being a really good left tackle for this team. Dalton Reisner I like, but he just hasn't quite panned out. Yeah, Cushenberry's okay, Glasgow is okay, and then they're going to have Billy Turner starting at right tackle, so that's a little concerning. He's coming back. He was with the Packers the past 3 seasons, but he started his career with the Broncos kind of as a swing tackle, swing guard, kind of just all around the offensive line. But they're going to have him starting at right tackle, which is a little concerning. Another negative, like I said, Russell Wilson's ability to adapt to a new offense. They brought so many offensive coordinators in to Seattle to get Russell Wilson to change, adapt to a new offense. Is what he wanted, is the let Russ cook thing. It's really Russ's fault that he didn't cook because he refused to change. He refused to run certain schemes. And it's not necessarily all his fault and his decision. He is a shorter quarterback. And when you're a shorter quarterback, it is more difficult to see all over the offensive line and run certain schemes. So we'll see if Nate Hackett can bring a scheme, kind of mesh a scheme that Russ likes, along with kind of that West Coast / Shanahan scheme, outside zone scheme that they kind of run in Green Bay. Ultimately, I do think this team, because of their talent, and their schedule is not as difficult as Kansas City's. That's really what it comes down to, is schedule. I think Kansas City and Denver have very comparable rosters. I just think Kansas City has the most difficult schedule in the NFL, bar none. So I think Denver finishes 11-6. I think that they do beat Kansas City once, and they face some easier teams like the Jets, Seattle, Houston, although I'm a little concerned about that week 1 matchup against Seattle. It's in Seattle, but still, I don't know. I just don't think Seattle is talented enough with Geno Smith. But they play the Jets, Jacksonville, Carolina, and then Arizona later in the season. I do think that they can pick up some more wins there. They've got a little bit easier time of it than Kansas City does. And then last team in the previews, last team in the AFC West is none other than the Los Angeles Chargers. Positive, Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert's a top 5 quarterback, potentially top 3 when this season is all said and done. He's an MVP candidate, and I think that I'm so glad that I was right about him. That's definitely one thing I can hold over people's head is, again, there was a lot of stupid stuff coming out of the draft about him not, again, was he perfect in Oregon? No, but he had all the skill. The arm talent was there. definitely like, what the heck was going on in Oregon? Why could they not get more out of Justin Herbert in that offense? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But there's a lot of stupid stuff in the draft process about him, whether or not he cared about football, all that dumb stuff. So, like I said, I think he's just kind of the ultimate processor. He's like a computer, is kind of what I would associate him with. He can go off script. He has the capability, but his arm talent is just so good that even when, the scheme isn't perfect and it's not the perfect play call, he can still just fit the ball into the tightest of windows downfield, which is insane. Some of the throws he made last season were just utterly crazy. So I think he continues to improve and is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL for a long time. Another thing I like about this team is their skill position group: Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, who I really like a lot. They like Josh Palmer, his second year, Austin Eckler, Gerald Everett, I think is going to be an upgrade. So that I definitely think is a positive for their team is these their skill position groups. I don't have a lot of questions there, and I think one more year Justin Herbert and getting familiar with him is really going to, and him trusting them more, I think is gonna really push this team over the hump. And then their defensive talent plus a new scheme, not a new scheme, excuse me. I was thinking of when Gus Bradley was there. Their defensive talent and their scheme now, the second year of the scheme, I think bringing in Khalil Mack is going to be huge for this team, especially since they're so awful in run defense last year. Having Sebastian Joseph Day, have him be healthy, and with this team now is really going to help them against the run. I like their corners. J.C. Jackson being hurt really does suck, so he's going to miss that first game against Vegas, which is really concerning because Devontae Adams. But I still think in the long run, they brought in Kyle Van Noy. They've got probably one of the better safety duos in Derwin James and Nasir Adderley in the NFL. And then, I think Asante Samuel Jr., Bryce Callahan, and Michael Davis can hold up until J.C. Jackson gets back. But I just think it's one of the better, more talented defenses and obviously best scheme in the NFL. It's kind of what everyone else is running now, is that shell coverage, kind of Vic Fangio scheme. And I think Los Angeles, the Chargers are one of the better teams to run it. Some negatives. Their offensive line is not very good. They've got Corey Linsley and Rashawn Slater, and those are really the only guys I feel comfortable with. I like the rookie Zion Johnson, who they drafted. He's going to be awesome for them, but they're starting Trey Pipkins at right tackle. That's really concerning. But again, with these really good teams, I'm kind of nitpicking, as I've mentioned a million times before. Really, their only question is right tackle, but still, tackle's an important position. And when it's Trey Pipkins, who's not that good, it is a concern. It is a negative. Another negative, their middle linebackers are not great. I mean, Drew Tranquill's okay. And then they did bring Kyle Van Noy, so that will definitely help, I think, solidify that middle linebacker group for them. I know he played a little bit more like outside linebacker than middle linebacker, but we'll see how it works. So I am that if there's one position on the defense that I'm not super sold on, it's middle linebacker. And then also another negative, the Chargers curse. This team has some type of curse or ghost looming over it that has cursed them for years. I don't know why or how it's happened, but it is one of the strangest things that I have ever seen. I mean, I remember that 2011 team was ranked, I think, they're the top offense and top defense in the NFL, and they missed the playoffs. which is, I think, one of the first time that's ever happened in NFL history. And then, they even had some really great teams there with Phillip Rivers, and even before Phil with Drew Brees. I think this team just really struggles to win big games and get into the playoffs, and then again win in the playoffs. Obviously, do I think that'll change now with the amount of talent they have? Hopefully, but you never know. But like I said, ultimately, I have them winning this division, going 13-4. The only reason I have them losing 4 games is because they're in the best division in football, and they've got a really hard schedule. I have them losing at Kansas City in week 2, probably one of their bigger losses, and then against Miami, Indianapolis, and then kind of a surprise loss at Arizona, kind of one that they'll drop there in the middle of the season. But they've got some tougher teams. I think they'll beat Denver twice, and I think they'll beat Las Vegas twice. But the schedule is still much easier than anything Kansas City has, so I'm not too concerned about them winning those games. And then for the playoffs, so how this is going to kind of play out is the first seed is going to be the Buffalo Bills. Second seed will be the Los Angeles Chargers. The third seed will be the Cincinnati Bengals. The fourth seed will be the Indianapolis Colts. The fifth seed will be the Baltimore Ravens. The sixth seed will be the Denver Broncos. And because of the last game of the season against the Las Vegas Raiders, which they will win, the Kansas City Chiefs will sneak in as the 7th seed. So that is our NFL division preview for both teams. Finally, we're done after 2 episodes. Basically 4 hours later. I went a little bit faster with this conference as opposed to the NFC, so hopefully this one's a little bit of an easier listen. But again, that is going to be it for the second episode of the Paul Witwer Football Show. If you like this podcast, please like, comment, and subscribe down below to help the channel out. If you want more content like this, please check out thepaulstopshere.com for more NFL, NBA, MLB, and college sports content.